Hey everybody, how you doing? It's Bruce here, traveling with Bruce. I've got a breaking news story here. I wish I didn't have to bring it to you, but I've got to bring it to you. It's actually from a breaking story that hit this morning from the Miami Herald paper. Three reporters there broke a serious story. Taylor Dolvin, Nick Nehamas, and Gwen Filosa are the three reporters that are the writers of this article. I'm basically just repeating in a video format what they've said, and try to follow along if you can. Thank you, all of you, for following this channel, Traveling with Bruce, subscribing to my channel, and helping me out with PayPal donations, keeping us going on the air. I do appreciate it. All right. The story is all about Key West. Here are some images I'm going to show you here of Key West, the area and the port area. So enjoy these while I kind of get into the story. You may recall back on November the 3rd, on the day of the big election, there were a series of referendums that were up for votes in Key West, and these had to do with whether or not to allow large cruise ships into downtown Key West to come to the dock facilities. There were three different referendum, all with regard to how big ships could be going forward, and the concerned citizens of Key West had run a plebiscite, and they were able to get three referendum on the ballot, and all three of the referendum passed, where a majority of the citizens of Key West, anywhere from like 61% of the voters to 80+% of the voters, approved the ballots to limit the size of cruise ships and limit the number of passengers that were going to come in. Now, the cruise lines were following this development, as were lobbyists. The business interests, there were serious business interests down here that did not want this to pass. And so flyers started to appear in people's mailboxes. And here is a couple of images here of the flyers that were appearing in people's mailboxes in Key West. Titled 5 minutes can mean the difference between life and death. Responders save lives. Let's save their jobs. If cruise ship charter amendment passed, Key West will suffer major funding cuts that will devastate vital city services like police and EMS. Fewer police and firefighters on the streets mean longer response times. Longer response times could mean the difference between your home being saved or burned to the ground. It can mean the difference between life and death, and there's so much for our families, or too much for our families, seniors, and small businesses to risk. This was a campaign to get people to vote no. And the Miami Herald reporters came up with this graph right here, this chart, where they uncovered through paperwork and diligence that the cruise industry funded a company or an entity called Community Leadership PAC, which in turn funded Florida Cruise PC, which in turn funded Protect Our Jobs, Inc., which in turn produced the mailers. And ultimately, their campaign failed anyway. I'm going to read a direct quote here from an article I read this morning out of Key West, and just bear with me and enjoy the photos in the meantime. Here we go. In early 2020, a Virginia-based political organization called Community Leadership PAC, or PAC, received a $100,000 donation from Cape Liberty Transfers, a Delaware company that shares an address with the Port Miami headquarters of cruise company Royal Caribbean Group. Federal tax filings show. Community Leadership PAC also received $100,000 from an Alaska hotel chain owned by cruise company Carnival Corporation in January, as well as $2,000 from the lobbying firm Alcalde and Fay Limited, the longtime lobbying firm of Cruise Line International Association, or CLIA, an industry trade group. In previous years, Community Leadership PAC received large donations from other major cruise companies. In a series of three contributions in June, August, and September, Community Leadership PAC turned around and donated $236,000 to a Florida political committee called Florida Cruise PC, which also received $200,000 directly from cruise company MSC Cruises in January. Florida Cruise PC then donated $175,000 in two transactions, August 27th, September the 3rd, to Protect Our Jobs Incorporated, a nonprofit that sent out the mailers in Fort West. Employees of Alcalde and Fay, the CLIA federal lobbying firm, are listed on the paperwork for both Community Leadership PAC and Florida Cruise PC. So by setting up these various structures and directing funds back and forth and all over the place, the cruise lines were not named on the flyer as basically backing the flyers to try to scare Key West voters into voting yes for these, to allow cruise ships. They wanted them to vote no. In other words, they wanted them to vote no, but the public said they went the other direction. The cruise lines knew early in the year that they were losing this campaign because the backers of these referendum were bringing to the public basic facts like this photo right here. Gigantic cruise ships between 3,000 and 5,000 people are coming in, 2 or 3 at a time, overrunning the area with hordes of tourists and causing all kinds of logistical problems in the downtown area, their transportation system. Key West is known for this. This is what Key West wants to be known for, an idyllic getaway for people. Most people who come here, drive here, spend 3, 4, 5, 10 days, 2 weeks, spend a lot of money. But cruise ship passengers, like all other Caribbean nations, they come in for 4, 6, 8 hours at a time, drop very little money on a per-person basis, and leave. And a lot of the money that is spent for tours and such go to the cruise lines in the form of commissions. The other issue, of course, is the quality of the water. Large ships stir up a lot of sediment, and the reefs in and around the Key West area are been heavily impacted. And this group wanted to limit the size of the ships and how many per day could come in and how many tourists a day would be allowed to visit Key West. It's not like cruise ships can't come, but only the smaller ships should be allowed in with smaller numbers of tourists, trying to rein in the out-of-control mayhem that was happening on a daily basis in Key West. Now, the cruise lines knew they were losing this battle. They weren't interested in debating in public because they would just get bad press. And so they decided to use what's called dark money and go behind the scenes to try to force the campaign in another direction. And they decided, in effect, to use a fear-mongering campaign where they used the term defunding the police and other services for the residents of Key West. There were ads also placed in Key West papers where maps were illustrated and they had red zones highlighted where they said these were the people who backed the plebiscite, and these are mainly white, affluent people in nice white neighborhoods, and they're against business in Key West. Very, very nasty, down and dirty campaign, and unfortunately, it just left a bad taste in the mouths of a lot of the Key West residents and voters. And so that is what happened in November. And I have to say, unfortunately, this is not an uncommon occurrence in business in many countries. A lot of businesses have now found legal ways to fund their interests through dark money campaigns and PACs and nonprofits and political action committees. And unfortunately, we, the public, are the ones who are bombarded with endless negative advertising when it comes to election time. And everyone has their personal interests in mind. And of course, business is business. Cruise lines are in the hole tens of billions of dollars to their bankers. They're trying to get back going again. And the last thing cruise lines need are to be shut out of idyllic places like Key West and other Caribbean nations. And so these kinds of campaigns, get used to it, folks. I think we're going to see more of it. The cruise lines will defend themselves. The CLIA people will defend themselves. They'll try to put the right spin on it. But unfortunately, this was going on behind the scenes all during 2020 while we were waiting for the pandemic to pass, and the folks in Key West were on the front lines of this kind of a campaign against their community and against their wishes and desires to limit within some form of reason, the number of people coming to the cruise line, coming to their city and area, only to be faced with this kind of a bombardment. And they were heavily outspent. Believe me, the folks who won the referendum were heavily outspent by those who didn't want it to pass, and yet the citizens went with the Yes campaign and made their move. There you have it. That is my story of the day. It's from the Miami Herald. Thank you again for subscribing to my channel, making support donations to PayPal. Links down below. And if you make a $10 or more donation to Traveling with Bruce, I will send you one of my postcards from TWB and Creston, British Columbia. Thank you, all of you who are making donations to my cause. Please consider becoming a sponsor member as well. 33 cents a day gets you into the sponsor member group. We're going to be on live today, 3 o'clock Friday. We're going to have trivia today. We're also on Mondays at 7. Thank you, everybody. We'll talk to you later. Bye for now.